In response to the dangerous crossings in small boats, the UK and France have just launched a brand new deal. But, as we'll see, the reality on the ground is far, far more complicated than any policy written on paper. Let's get right into it.
I want to start with a number, 1,157. That is the number of people who cross the channel in small boats, not in a month, not in a week, but in a single weekend recently. It's a figure that immediately puts the sheer scale of this challenge into very sharp focus. So to really get a handle on this, here's what we're going to cover. We'll start with that weekend and what the numbers tell us. Then we'll break down this new one-in, one-out deal. We'll hear directly from people on the ground in Calais. We'll also examine the intense political storm this is causing in the UK. And finally, we'll look at what all of this means for the future. Okay, so first, let's really dig into those numbers, because they reveal a pretty stark gap between the new policy and the persistent reality of the situation. Just look at this comparison. It's staggering, really. In one weekend, you have 1,157 people arriving. Now compare that to the total number of people who have been returned to France under this new deal since it even started. Just 3. This enormous gap is the fundamental problem the new policy is supposed to fix.
So that brings us to the policy itself. What exactly is this new plan? Let's take a closer look at the one-in, one-out deal, which is the government's official answer to these numbers.
The idea, on the surface, is pretty straightforward. It's a reciprocal agreement. For every single person the UK manages to return to France after an illegal crossing, France has agreed to facilitate the transfer of one verified asylum seeker to the UK, but through a safe and legal route. The stated goal here is to break the business model of the criminal smuggling gangs by creating a controlled official system. So, on paper, this is how the process is meant to unfold. Step 1. A person crosses the channel and is detained by UK authorities. Step 2. Those authorities process the individual. Step 3. If their case is deemed invalid, that person is then returned to France. And here's the crucial part. Step 4. Only after France formally accepts that return do they then send a legal refugee to the UK in exchange. And this statement from the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, really captures the government's entire position. The deal is being framed as an absolutely essential tool in a much larger strategy. A strategy to, in their words, restore order and regain control over the UK's borders.
But here's the thing. A policy designed in the corridors of power in London and Paris can look and feel very different on the cold, windswept beaches of Calais. To really understand why these crossings are still happening, we have to listen to the people who are living this reality day in and day out.
This is Ahmed. He is a 30-year-old man from Syria. And his words, I think, reveal the fundamental challenge this policy is up against. He's hard about the deal. He knows it exists, but his determination is completely unshaken. To him, government policies are, as he puts it, just talk. The urgent, desperate need to leave, that's what's real. And to really grasp the depth of that resolve, you have to know his story. Ahmed has already tried to make this journey once before. On that attempt, 3 people in his boat died. They didn't drown. They died from a toxic mixture of spilled fuel and seawater that had pooled at the bottom of the dinghy. The fact that he is still determined to try again, it speaks volumes about the sheer desperation that's driving these journeys. And aid organizations working on the coast, they agree with Ahmed's sentiment. They're pointing to huge practical barriers that they say make the deal's legal pathways simply unworkable for most people there. Think about it. To even apply for the legal route, you need a passport or a valid ID. You need a secure, reliable internet connection, and you must be officially registered as an asylum seeker in France. For someone who has fled a war zone, often with nothing but the clothes on their back, these are often impossible hurdles. So what you have is this massive disconnect. On one side, there's the official hope, which is backed by a think tank report, suggesting this deal could, if fully scaled up, slash crossings by as much as 75%. But on the other side, you have the on-the-ground reality, where aid workers say the system's requirements are so restrictive that for many, the small, dangerous boats will remain their only perceived option. Now, this isn't just a logistical problem or a humanitarian issue, it's a political firestorm in the United Kingdom. The pressure on the government is immense, and it is coming from all sides of the political spectrum. The political landscape right now is incredibly tense. On one side, you have parties like Reform UK pushing for much harder-line policies, like getting rid of indefinite residency for new arrivals. Then you have human rights groups who say they're being attacked and pressured into silence. And right in the middle, you have the Labour government, trying to project an image of control and order. In fact, more than 150 human rights and refugee organizations recently signed a collective statement, and they're warning about the climate this heated debate is creating. They argue that some media reporting and social media attacks are, in their words, stoking the flames of division, and they're pleading for more responsible public discourse on the issue.
Now, the government is keen to show that this new deal isn't happening in a vacuum. They want it seen as just one piece of a much broader enforcement strategy. So they're highlighting other numbers, like removing over 35,000 people in the last year and a sharp increase in workplace enforcement rates, to argue they're taking a tough stance across the board, not just on the channel. The goal is to build a narrative of control over the entire immigration system.
So, after all that, where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us with a brand new policy, a persistent and difficult reality, and an incredibly volatile political climate all colliding at once. And it's really crucial to remember just how new this all is. The deal only became active in early August, and it didn't even start in practice until mid-September, when it was immediately tested by that huge wave of crossings. This is still just a pilot scheme. It's scheduled to run until June of 2026, which gives both governments time to assess whether this approach can actually work in the long term. And that really brings us to the final, central question. When you have the stark reality of human desperation clashing head-on with the complex machinery of international policy, all while being churned in the heat of domestic politics, can any one deal, can any single solution ever truly be enough to control the channel? It's a question for which right now there are no easy answers.